The blizzard descended upon Montana's Frost Creek Valley, like divine wrath transforming the December night into a howling white nightmare. Suspended from the ancient maple's highest branch, 12-year-old Waya, twisted in the merciless wind, her small body, a grotesque pendulum marking time toward death. Her ankles bound with coarse rope had lost all feeling hours ago. The hemp bit deep into her flesh, each gust of wind sending fresh waves of agony through her inverted form. Blood from a gash above her left eye had frozen into crimson streaks that decorated her face like war paint. Her buckskin dress, torn and inadequate against the storm's fury, offered no protection from the bone-deep cold that was slowly claiming her life. This is what happens to Cherokee traders. Jake Morrison had sneered before riding away with his men, leaving her to die slowly in the storm. Your uncle will find you come morning, and he'll know the price of defying Mr. Bremer. But morning felt like a lifetime away. The world had become a spinning carousel of pain and cold, punctuated by the distant howl of wolves drawn by the scent of blood and desperation. Through the swirling snow, she could barely make out the dark silhouette of a cabin, perhaps 100 yards away, its chimney releasing a thin trail of smoke that seemed to mock her with its promise of warmth. Inside that cabin, Elias Boone sat hunched over a dying fire, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of bitter coffee. At 45, he was a man carved from guilt and granite, his face bearing the deep lines of a soul that had seen too much and done worse. The scar on his left shoulder, a crude X, burned into his flesh 3 years ago, throbbed with each change in the weather, a permanent reminder of the price he'd paid for growing a conscience. The sound reached him first as a whisper beneath the wind's roar, then grew into something that made his blood freeze, the soft, rhythmic creaking of rope against wood. He knew that sound, had heard it in a dozen frontier towns at 100 makeshift gallows. But this was different, slower, more deliberate, like the pendulum of some infernal clock. Elias set down his cup and moved to the frost-covered window, peering out into the storm. At first, he saw nothing but swirling white. Then, as a brief lull in the wind cleared the air, he glimpsed something that drove the breath from his lungs, a small figure, hanging from the massive maple, swaying like a broken doll in the grip of winter's fury. For a moment, the sight transported him back 3 years to another storm, another night when he'd stood in burning Cherokee lodges and watched children scream. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The acrid smell of smoke, the sound of gunfire. The sight of a Cherokee woman falling with a bullet in her chest while she tried to shield her daughter. He'd pulled that trigger. He'd been the one to. The present crashed back as he realized the figure in the tree was still moving, still alive. Jesus Christ. He breathed, grabbing his lantern and rifle. Behind him, through the cabin's back window, he caught the yellow gleam of eyes reflecting the lamplight. Wolves. The pack had been growing bolder as the winter deepened, and they'd caught the scent of fresh blood. Elias burst through the cabin door, his boots crunching through knee-deep snow. The wind hit him like a living thing, trying to drive him back, but he pressed forward toward the tree. As he drew closer, he could see the victim clearly. A Cherokee girl no more than 12 years old, her dark hair whipping around a face that bore the unmistakable stamp of her people's nobility, even in extremis. Her eyes found his as he approached, and in them he saw something that stopped him cold. Not the blank stare of approaching death, but fierce, intelligent defiance. This child was fighting for every breath, clinging to life, with a tenacity that reminded him of the warrior woman he'd killed years ago. "Can you hear me?" he called out, pulling his knife from its sheath. Her lips moved, but the words were lost in the wind. He climbed the tree quickly, his old cavalry training serving him well, and began sawing at the rope. The hemp was thick and frozen, but his blade was sharp. Within minutes, he'd cut through the bonds, catching the girl's small form as she fell. She was light as a feather and cold as the grave, her body racked with violent shivering. But as he carried her toward the cabin, She managed to whisper something that made his heart clench. "They said this is what traitors get. But I ain't no traitor. I'm Cherokee." The wolves followed at a distance, their hunger palpable in the winter air. But tonight, at least, they would go hungry. Tonight, a man who had forgotten how to be human was about to remember what it meant to save a life instead of taking one. As they reached the cabin door, Elias caught sight of fresh horse tracks in the snow. Deep impressions that meant multiple riders, recent enough that the storm hadn't yet erased them. Morrison's men had been here, and they'd be back. The girl's rescue was only the beginning of what promised to be a long and bloody night. Inside the cabin's warmth, as he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, the girl looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. "What's your name, mister?" "Elias Boone." He paused, studying her face. "What's yours?" "Waya. It means wolf in Cherokee." She managed a weak smile. Mama always said wolves survive when other animals die. As if summoned by her words, the first howl rose from the darkness outside. Not the call of four-legged predators, but the hunting cry of men who had come to finish what they'd started. The real wolves were circling, and they wore human faces. Elias checked his weapons and settled in to wait. The storm was breaking, but the night's violence was just beginning. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that this frozen child might be the key to a redemption he'd never thought possible. The sound of hoofbeats in the snow grew louder, and with it came the promise of gunfire blood, and the terrible arithmetic of survival that would determine whether the girl called Wolf would live to see another sunrise. Her name was Waya, and she told him her story through chattering teeth as he worked to restore circulation to her frostbitten hands. Her stepfather, Jeremiah Kane, had sold her to Cole Bremer for $30 silver and a bottle of whiskey payment for gambling debts and the promise of continued protection for his own skin. The betrayal cut deeper than the rope burns on her ankles. "Bremer's got plans for our valley," she said, her voice growing stronger as warmth returned to her body. "Gold beneath the sacred places, railroad money from back east. He figures if he can scare the tribal council bad enough, they'll sign the relocation papers." Elias knew Cole Bremer by reputation, a land baron who'd built his empire on Cherokee blood and broken treaties. What the girl didn't know was that Elias had once been Bremer's most trusted enforcer, the man who'd burned 7 Cherokee villages in 3 years before growing what some might charitably call a conscience. The brand on his shoulder, the X that marked him as a traitor in Bremer's eyes, had been Bremer's parting gift when Elias refused to massacre a village full of women and children. He'd been running from that choice ever since hiding in this remote cabin, while the ghosts of his past haunted every shadow. "They hung me from that tree to send a message." Waya continued, her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm broth. "My uncle leads the tribal council. They think seeing me dead will make him sign away our homeland. Your uncle won't abandon you," Elias said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He'd seen men make harder choices for less. "No," she agreed. "But he might trade the valley to save what's left of our people. He's a good man, but he thinks like a chief, not a warrior. He'll sacrifice the land to save the lives." As the night deepened, Waya told him more about her family. Her mother had died 3 years ago in a cavalry raid, a raid that Elias now realized with sick certainty he'd participated in. Her father had been killed defending their village. She'd been raised by her uncle Chief Sequoia until her mother's white husband had surfaced to claim custody and sell her like livestock. "I remember the day my mother died," she said, her voice distant. "She was trying to protect the children in the schoolhouse. A soldier with a scar on his shoulder shot her down. I was hiding in the root cellar, watching through a crack in the boards. I'll never forget his face." Elias's blood turned to ice. The scar she was describing, the X, branded into his flesh, had been fresh and then not yet the faded mark it was now. He'd been the one to kill her mother, to cut down the brave woman who died shielding children. The weight of that knowledge sat on his chest like a stone. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it more than any words he'd ever spoken. "Not your fault," she replied. "White men been killing Cherokee for sport since before I was born. You just happened to be the one who found me." If only she knew. A sound from outside broke the moment, the soft whinny of horses moving through snow. Elias motioned for silence and moved to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he could see torches moving through the trees, perhaps a dozen riders spread out in a rough semicircle around the cabin. "They're back," he whispered. Waya was already moving, checking the rifle he'd given her with surprising competence. "How many?" "Too many for a straight fight. But maybe we can even the odds." Jake Morrison. The voice that cut through the winter air was harsh and commanding. "We know you got something that belongs to Mr. Bremer. Send her out, and maybe we'll let you live long enough to regret crossing us." Elias recognized the voice. Pete Daniels, one of Bremer's lieutenants. A man who'd burn down an orphanage if the price was right. "You want her?" Elias called back. "Come and take her." "We aim to. But first we're going to make you watch her die slow. Eye for an eye, Boone. You cost us money, now we cost you something you care about." The attack came from 3 directions at once. Gunfire erupted from the tree-lined bullets, shattering the cabin's windows and punching through the wooden walls. Elias dove for cover, pulling Waya down with him as splinters filled the air like deadly rain. "Can you shoot?" he asked, loading his rifle. "I can learn fast," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Then learn. Your life depends on it." The first man to reach the cabin came through the back door, his rifle raised and ready. Waya's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot, fired with grim determination, finished what the first had started. The man crumpled to the floor, his blood spreading across the wooden planks. "Good girl," Elias said, not looking away from his own targets. "Now keep shooting." The battle was brief, but vicious. Elias's marksmanship, honed by years of violence, claimed 3 attackers before they could breach the cabin's defenses. But the cost was high. He'd taken a bullet in the ribs, and the cabin was beginning to smolder where torches had been thrown against the walls. "But we need to move." He gasped, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. "This place is going to burn." They made their escape through the root cellar, emerging into the storm-lashed night, with their pursuers close behind. Elias's horse, a sturdy mountain-bred gelding, carried them both as they fled toward the high country bullets, whining past their heads like angry wasps. Behind them, the cabin erupted in flames, 3 years of solitude and hiding consumed in minutes. But for the first time since receiving his brand, Elias felt something he'd thought was dead purpose. This girl, this fierce, determined child, had awakened something in him that went beyond mere survival. As they climbed toward the abandoned mine that would serve as their refuge, Waya pressed against his back, her small arms holding tight to his waist. "Why'd you save me?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Because someone had to," he replied. "Because you deserved better than dying alone in that tree." That ain't the whole truth. She was right, of course. But the whole truth that he'd killed her mother, that he'd built his reputation on Cherokee blood, that saving her might be the only way to balance the scales of his damnation, was too heavy for this moment. There would be time for confessions later if they survived the night. The mine shaft loomed ahead, a black mouth in the mountainside that promised shelter from the storm and their pursuers. As they disappeared into its depths, Elias allowed himself one look back at the valley below. The burning cabin cast an orange glow against the snow, a beacon that would guide their enemies straight to them. The real test was yet to come. The abandoned copper mine had been carved into the mountainside 20 years ago, its tunnels and chambers now home to bats and memories. Elias had discovered it during his first winter as a fugitive, and it had served as a hideout more than once. Now, with dawn breaking gray and cold over the valley, it would have to serve again. How far back do these tunnels go? Waya asked, her voice echoing in the darkness. Far enough, but we won't be going deep. Too easy to get trapped back there if they smoke us out. They'd made camp in a chamber about 50 yards from the entrance, close enough to the surface to ensure fresh air, but far enough to provide cover. The horse, nervous in the confined space, stood ready for a quick escape if needed. Waya had cleaned and bandaged Elias's wound with strips torn from her dress, her small hands surprisingly gentle. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing anything vital, but he'd lost enough blood to leave him weak and shaky. "You done this before?" he asked, watching her work. "Mama taught me. Said Cherokee women needed to know how to patch up their men after they'd been foolish enough to get shot." Smart woman. She was. Until she got herself killed trying to save other people's children. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Elias knew she was thinking about her mother's death, about the soldier with the scarred shoulder who'd gunned down a brave woman trying to protect innocence. She had no idea she was looking at that very man. "Sometimes dying for others is the only way to live with yourself," he said carefully, "and sometimes it's just dying for nothing." They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, sharing water from Elias's canteen. The mine was quiet, except for the distant drip of water and the occasional flutter of bat wings. It felt like a tomb, which Elias supposed it might become if Daniels and his men tracked them here. "Tell me about Bremer," Waya said, breaking the silence. "You know him, don't you? The way you talk about him, it's personal." Elias was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. "I used to work for him. Different man then, or thought I was. Did things I ain't proud of." "What kind of things?" "The kind that keep you awake at night. The kind that make you wonder if there's any such thing as redemption." "Is that what you're doing now, trying to redeem yourself?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to die for something worthwhile instead of nothing at all." A sound from the mine entrance cut short their conversation, the soft scrape of boots on stone. Their pursuers had found them. "How many?" Waya whispered, checking her rifle. "3, maybe 4, moving careful." "Can we take them?" "We're about to find out." Elias positioned himself behind a fallen support beam, his rifle trained on the tunnel entrance. Waya crouched beside him, her weapon ready. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. "Boone." Daniel's voice carried through the tunnels. "You're trapped in there like a rat. Come out and we'll make it quick." Elias remained silent, watching the shadows dance in the tunnel mouth. Behind him, he could hear Waya's breathing steady and controlled despite the danger. The girl had ice in her veins. The first man to show himself was a stranger, one of Bremer's newer recruits. Elias's bullet took him in the chest, the report echoing like thunder in the confined space. The man fell without a sound, his rifle clattering across the stone floor. "Jesus," someone shouted. "He's got the high ground." "So what?" Daniel's voice was harsh with anger. "He's got 1 rifle and a wounded girl. We got him outnumbered." "The wounded girl's got a rifle too." Waya called out, her voice carrying clearly through the tunnels. "And she ain't afraid to use it." To prove her point, she fired at a shadow moving in the entrance. Her shot sparked off the stone wall, but it was close enough to make the shadow duck back into cover. "Not little bitch," Daniel snarled. "When I get my hands on you, I'm gonna finish what we started with that rope." "You'll have to catch me first," Waya replied. "And Cherokee girls don't catch easy." The siege continued for over an hour, with Daniel's men probing the defenses and falling back when met with accurate fire. But Elias knew they were in trouble. His ammunition was running low, and the men outside could afford to wait them out. "We need another way out," he told Waya during a lull in the fighting. "There is one. I saw it when we first came in a narrow shaft that leads up to the ridge. It's tight, but I could fit through it." "Too dangerous. You're just a child." I'm a child who's already killed 2 men today, she replied. And I'm small enough to move without being seen. Before he could stop her, she was moving toward the back of the chamber where a narrow opening led upward into darkness. It was barely wide enough for a grown man's shoulders, but she might be able to squeeze through. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. "Then start shooting. Keep them focused on this entrance." "Waya. My name means wolf. Remember, wolves hunt in packs." She disappeared into the shaft, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and his dwindling ammunition. Outside, Daniels was growing impatient, his men starting to take more risks. It was now or never. 10 minutes later, the shooting started from above. Waya had reached the ridge and was picking off Daniels' men with methodical precision. Caught between 2 fires, the attackers began to panic. "She's up there," someone shouted. "On the ridge." How the hell did she get up there? Elias took advantage of the confusion to advance on their position. His rifle spoke twice, claiming 2 more of Daniels' men. That left only Daniels himself crouched behind a boulder with nowhere to run. "Give it up, Pete," Elias called out. "You're done." "Like hell I am." Daniels rose from cover, his pistol blazing. But his shots went wide, driven by desperation rather than skill. Elias's return fire was precise and final. The mine fell silent except for the echo of gunshots fading into memory. Elias slumped against the cave wall, his wound bleeding again from the exertion. They'd won, but at what cost? Each man they killed brought more attention from Bremer, more danger to the Cherokee people caught in the middle. Waya appeared at his side, having climbed down from the ridge with cat-like agility. Her face was pale but determined, marked by the knowledge that she'd killed again in the name of survival. 4 more, she said quietly. That makes 6 total. 6 men who won't hurt anyone else. 6 men who had families, friends, people who'll mourn them. However, and how many Cherokee children would they have killed if we'd let them live? It was a hard question with no easy answer. They gathered what supplies they could from the dead men: ammunition, food, a better horse. The war was escalating, and they needed every advantage they could get. As they prepared to leave the mine, Waya found something that made her blood run cold, a leather pouch containing official documents. She handed them to Elias, who read them with growing alarm. "Maps," he said, "of the Cherokee settlements, the gold deposits, the territorial boundaries. And look at this: orders from the territorial governor authorizing the use of any means necessary to clear Cherokee claims from the valley." What does that mean? It means this goes all the way to the top. Someone in the territorial government wants your people gone, and they're willing to let Bremer do whatever it takes. Then we stop them, all of them. We will. But first we need to warn your people. They need to know what they're really facing. They rode south toward the Cherokee settlements, following deer trails and creek beds to avoid the main roads. The country was beautiful in its harsh winter dress, snow-covered peaks, frozen streams, and forests that held the promise of spring beneath their icy embrace. It was also dangerous. Bremer's men weren't the only threat in these mountains. There were bears, wolves, and the ever-present danger of exposure in the brutal cold. But Waya proved to be an excellent guide, reading the land like a book and leading them safely through terrain that would have challenged experienced frontiersmen. As they rode, she told him more about her people, their history, their traditions, their deep connection to the land. She spoke of her mother with reverence, of her uncle with respect, and of her people's long struggle to maintain their way of life in a changing world. "We're not savages," she said as they stopped to rest beside a frozen stream. "We have laws, customs, honor. We've lived here for generations, and we've kept our word to everyone who's dealt with us fairly." "I know," Elias replied. "I've seen enough of both sides to know who the real savages are." "Then why did you ride with them? Why did you help them burn our villages?" The question he'd been dreading had finally come. Elias was quiet for a long moment, studying the girl's face. She deserved the truth, even if it destroyed whatever trust had grown between them, because I was lost. He said finally. I'd been fighting for so long I'd forgotten what I was fighting for. Men like Bremer make it seem simple civilization against savagery progress against tradition. But it's not simple. Nothing ever is. No, she agreed. It's not. They reached the Cherokee settlement as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The village was larger than Elias had expected, perhaps 80 lodges arranged around a central fire pit with smoke rising from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter carrying on the evening breeze. But there was tension in the air too. Armed warriors stood guard at the village perimeter, and Elias could see the strain on the faces of the women and elders. These were people living under siege, waiting for the next attack. Waya, a tall man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, ran toward them. This was Chief Sequoia, her uncle, and the relief in his voice was palpable. We thought you were dead. When they found the blood on the tree, the cut rope, I would have been if not for him, Waya said, gesturing to Elias. Sequoia studied Elias with careful eyes. You're the one who saved my niece. I did what needed doing. You did more than that. You have my gratitude and the gratitude of my people. Other villagers had gathered around them, drawn by the commotion. Elias saw suspicion in some faces, curiosity in others. He was a white man in a Cherokee village, and trust would not come easily. We need to talk, Waya said to her uncle. About Bremer, about what's really happening. It's worse than you think. They gathered in the chief's lodge Sequoia, Waya, Elias, and several tribal elders. By the light of the fire, Waya told her story from her stepfather's betrayal to the hanging tree from the battles at the cabin, and mine to the discovery of the government documents. When she finished, the lodge was silent except for the crackling of flames. The territorial governor, Sequoia, said finally, studying the papers. He's given Bremer official authority to drive us from our lands. Which means the law won't protect you, Elias said. In fact, the law is working against you. Then what do you suggest? Asked Grey Wolf, one of the tribal elders. That we abandon everything our ancestors built, that we walk away from sacred ground. I suggest you fight, Elias replied. Not just Bremer and his men, but the system that created them. Make them pay such a price for this valley that they'll think twice before trying it again. And what of the cost to our people? Sequoia asked. We are not warriors by nature. We are farmers, teachers, storytellers. Many of us have never killed a man. Then you'll learn, Waya said, her young voice carrying surprising authority. Or you'll die. Those are your choices. The debate continued long into the night, with voices raised in passion and frustration. Some of the elders supported Sequoia's peaceful approach, believing they could still find a diplomatic solution. Others, led by Grey Wolf, favored immediate and violent resistance. Finally, Sequoia raised his hand for silence. We will vote. All in favor of continued negotiation. 4 hands went up, including Sequoia's own. All in favor of armed resistance. 8 hands rose, including Waya's. Then it is decided. We will fight. But we will fight with honor, according to our traditions. We will not become the monsters that they claim we are. As the meeting broke up, Elias found himself alone with Waya beside the dying fire. You're proud of yourself, he observed. I convinced them to fight for their lives. Yes, I'm proud. Fighting and winning are different things. Bremer has more men, better weapons, and the government on his side. Then we'll have to be smarter. You know his methods, his weaknesses. You can teach us. Elias was quiet for a long moment. There's something you need to know. About your mother, about what happened 3 years ago. What about it? I was there. I rode with the men who burned your village. Waya went very still. You were there. I was. I saw your mother die and I didn't stop it. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Waya finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Did you kill her? No, but I might as well have. I was part of it, part of the machine that destroyed your family. She stared into the fire for a long time, her face unreadable. Then why did you save me? Because I remembered what it felt like to be human. Because I saw you hanging there and I couldn't be that man anymore. The man who let my mother die. Yes. Waya stood and walked to the lodge entrance, looking out at the sleeping village. I should hate you, she said. You should, but I don't. Maybe I should, but I don't. You saved my life and you're helping my people. That has to count for something. Does it? She turned back to face him. My mother used to say that redemption was possible for anyone willing to pay the price. Are you willing to pay it? I'm still trying to figure out what that price is. I think you already know. The attack came at dawn, just as the first light was breaking over the eastern peaks. Elias woke to the sound of gunfire and shouting his soldier's instincts, jerking him instantly alert. Through the lodge entrance, he could see muzzle flashes in the forest and Cherokee warriors scrambling for defensive positions. How many? He asked Waya, who was already dressed and armed. Too many, she replied grimly. Bremers brought reinforcements. Professional soldiers, bounty hunters, maybe 50 men total. Elias forced himself to his feet, ignoring the fire in his healing wounds. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see the attackers advancing in disciplined formation, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. This isn't random, he said. This is military. Someone's been training them. Does it matter they're here to kill us? They ran through the village past lodges where families were gathering their children and seeking shelter. The Cherokee warriors were fighting bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. This wasn't a raid, it was a massacre in the making. Ate Chief Sequoia. Elias called out as they reached the defensive line. Where do you need us? The South Ridge Sequoia replied, pointing to a rise that overlooked the village. They're trying to establish a firing position up there. If they succeed, they'll be able to pick us off from above. Elias and Waya ran toward the ridge, dodging bullets and keeping low. The slope was steep and rocky, offering good cover but treacherous footing. They found defensive positions behind a fallen log and began picking off attackers as they tried to advance. There. Waya pointed to a group of men trying to flank their position. 8 of them moving through the trees. Elias adjusted his aim and fired, dropping the lead man. Waya followed suit, her shot taking another attacker in the shoulder. The remaining men scattered, seeking better cover. We can't hold this position much longer, Elias said, reloading. They'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Then we make them pay for every inch. But as they prepared to fall back, Elias heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of a bugle, clear and commanding. It was a military signal, and it was coming from the forest behind their defensive line. Cavalry, he said. Bremers got army support. The soldiers emerged from the trees in perfect formation, their blue uniforms and polished brass gleaming in the morning sun. At their head rode Captain James Thornton, a man Elias recognized from his own military days. A man who should have been cashiered out of the service years ago for conduct unbecoming. Attention, Cherokee insurgents. Thornton's voice carried across the valley. This is Captain Thornton of the United States Army. You are ordered to surrender immediately or face the consequences of your rebellion. Chief Sequoia emerged from the village, his hands raised but his bearing proud. Captain Thornton, we are not insurgents. We are Cherokee citizens defending our lawful rights to this land. You are rebels in violation of territorial law. Thornton replied, You have harbored known criminals and resisted lawful authority. Surrender now, or we will take you by force. The what criminals? Sequoia asked. Thornton gestured toward the ridge where Elias and Waya were positioned. Elias Boone wanted for murder and desertion. And the Cherokee girl who has killed 6 of Mr. Bremer's men in cold blood. Those men were trying to murder a child, Sequoia said. She defended herself. She committed murder, as did the man who helped her. Surrender them both, and we'll consider mercy for the rest of your people. Elias felt his heart sink. This was the trap Bremer had used official channels to legitimize his war against the Cherokee. With army support, he could claim legal authority for whatever atrocities he planned. We need to surrender, he whispered to Waya. If they capture us, at least your people might live. No, she said firmly. We don't give up. Not now, not ever. Will Waya be reasonable? Against soldiers and mercenaries together, we don't stand a chance. Maybe not, but we don't abandon our people. Before Elias could stop her, she was standing up, her rifle aimed at Thornton. You want us? She called out. Come and take us. The standoff stretched on, with neither side willing to make the first move. Thornton's men were disciplined and well-armed, but they were also surrounded by Cherokee warriors who knew every rock and tree in the valley. Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new voice cut through the morning air, a woman's voice, strong and commanding. Captain Thornton, stand down your men. From the northern tree line, a group of Cherokee warriors emerged on horseback. At their head rode a woman in her 30s, wearing traditional Cherokee dress, mixed with practical frontier clothing. She sat her horse with natural authority, and the warriors who followed her moved with the discipline of seasoned fighters. Tsula. Waya breathed, her rifle nearly slipping from her grasp. Mother, Elias stared in disbelief. Your mother's dead. You said she was killed 3 years ago. I thought she was. I saw her fall, saw the blood. The woman rode closer, and Elias could see the resemblance clearly now. The same dark eyes, the same proud bearing, the same fierce determination. But this woman bore scars that spoke of hard fighting and harder survival. My daughter, Tsula said, dismounting and walking toward them. I've been searching for you. Waya ran to her mother, tears streaming down her face. They told me you were dead. I saw you shot down in the schoolhouse. I was shot. But Cherokee women are harder to kill than most people think. Tsula held her daughter close, then looked over at Elias. You're the one who saved her. I did what I could. You did more than that. You gave her back her life, and for that, you have my eternal gratitude. Captain Thornton was growing impatient with the reunion. This is touching, but it doesn't change anything. You're all under arrest for violation of territorial law. What law? Tsula demanded, her voice cutting like a blade. The law that allows white men to string up Cherokee children. The law that gives land barons the right to murder our families. The law that maintains order in this territory. Thornton replied. Mr. Bremer has legitimate grievances against your people. Mr. Bremer is a criminal and a butcher, Tsula said. And any law that protects him is worth less than the paper it's written on. You're in no position to make demands, Thornton said. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Am I? Tsula smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Tell me, Captain, how many Cherokee villages have you helped burn in the last 3 years? Thornton's face reddened. That's classified military information. It's not a secret. 7 villages, 43 dead, over 200 people displaced. All in the name of territorial progress. Those operations were necessary to maintain peace. Peace for whom? Not for Cherokee families. Not for Cherokee children. Tsula's voice rose. You want to know what peace looks like, Captain? It looks like a 12-year-old girl hanging upside down from a tree left to die because her people won't abandon their homes. None, that's enough, Thornton snapped. You're all under arrest. Sergeant, prepare the men to advance. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Tsula said calmly. And why not? Because you're not just facing one Cherokee village. You're facing all of them." As if summoned by her words, Cherokee warriors began emerging from the forest on all sides. They rose from concealed positions, appeared from behind trees, and rocks materialized from the landscape itself. Within minutes, Thornton's force was surrounded by over 100 Cherokee fighters. "You see, Captain," Tsula continued, "word travels fast in these mountains. When one village is threatened, all villages respond. That's how we've survived for 1,000 years." Thornton looked around at his surrounded men, his face pale with the realization that the tables had turned. "This is an act of war against the United States government." "No," Tsula said. "This is self-defense. You came here to arrest children and burn homes. We came here to stop you. Mr. Bremer has legal authority. Mr. Bremer is a murderer and a liar. And so are you, Captain, if you continue to support him." The standoff stretched on, with neither side willing to fire the first shot. Elias could see the calculation in Thornton's eyes. He was outnumbered, surrounded, and far from reinforcements. But he was also a career soldier who'd built his reputation on never backing down from a fight. "There's another way," Elias said, stepping forward. "Captain, you know me. We served together in the Dakota campaigns." "I know you," Thornton replied coldly. "You're a deserter and a traitor to your uniform." "Maybe. But I'm also the man who saved your life at Cedar Creek. That has to count for something." Thornton was quiet for a long moment, remembering. "What are you proposing?" "Single combat. Me against one of Bremer's men. Winner takes all." And that's barbaric. Bremer sputtered, his face pale with fear. "I don't have to agree to anything." "You do if you want to leave this valley alive," Tsula said. "My warriors have you surrounded. You can fight your way out and lose half your men, or you can accept the challenge and maybe walk away with your skins intact." "And if Boone wins," Thornton asked, "then you and your men leave Cherokee territory. No arrests, no charges, no more support for Bremer's operations. And if our man wins, then we'll negotiate terms, but honorably with respect on both sides." Thornton looked around at his surrounded men, then at Bremer's increasingly panicked face. "Who fights for you?" Bremer pointed to a massive man with a scarred face and dead eyes. "Isaiah Crow. Best fighter I've got." Elias felt his stomach drop. He'd heard of Isaiah Crow, a giant of a man who'd killed 20 men in single combat across 3 territories. If speed was Elias's advantage, Crow possessed the kind of raw strength that could crush a man's skull with bare hands. "I accept," Elias said, knowing he had no choice. "This is madness," Waya whispered. "He'll kill you." "Maybe. But it's the only way to give your people a fighting chance." As the two sides prepared for the combat, Tsula approached Elias. "You don't have to do this. We can fight our way out." "And how many of your people will die in the process?" "Some, but they'll die free. Maybe there's another way. Maybe one death can prevent 100. Tsula studied his face. "You're not doing this for us, are you? You're doing it for her. For my daughter. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." "No," Tsula said. "You're doing it because you love her, and because you think dying for her will balance the scales for what you've done. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. Maybe living for her would be harder and more meaningful." The circle formed naturally, with Cherokee warriors and cavalry soldiers creating a rough arena in the center of the valley. Isaiah Crow stood across from Elias, rolling his massive shoulders and flexing hands that looked like they could strangle a bear. "You killed good men." Crow said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm gonna enjoy watching you die." "They died because they tortured a child," Elias replied, checking his pistol one last time. "I'd kill them again if I had the chance." Brave words from a dead man. Captain Thornton stepped forward, his role as referee clearly distasteful. "The rules are simple. Pistols at 20 paces. When I give the signal, you walk toward each other. First man to draw and fire wins. No other weapons, no interference. What if they both die? Bremer asked nervously. Then God help us all. Tsula said, her hand resting on her rifle. Elias walked to his position, his mind surprisingly calm. He'd fought in dozens of gunfights, faced death more times than he could count. But this felt different, more final, more meaningful. Win or lose this would be his last fight. He looked at Waya, who stood beside her mother with tears streaming down her face. The girl had been through so much, had grown up too fast in a world that showed children no mercy. If he died here, at least she'd have her mother back. At least she'd have a chance at the life she deserved. You ready, Boone? Thornton called out. Ready. Crow, been ready since I got here. Then begin. The two men started walking toward each other, their footsteps crunching in the snow. 20 paces became 15, then 10. Elias could see the confidence in Crow's eyes, the certainty of victory. The big man was fast despite his size, and he had the advantage of reach and raw power. At 7 paces, Crow drew. His hand moved like lightning clearing leather and raising his pistol in one smooth motion. But Elias was already moving his own weapon, coming up, even as he threw himself to the side. Both guns fired simultaneously, the reports echoing off the surrounding mountains like thunder. Crow's bullet tore through the air where Elias had been standing a split second before. Elias's shot caught the giant in the shoulder, spinning him around, but not dropping him. Blood sprayed across the snow, but Crow kept his feet, his face twisted with rage and pain. First blood to Boone, Thornton announced grimly. But the fight continues until one man falls. Crow snarled and raised his pistol again, but Elias was already moving. He rolled behind a snow-covered boulder, bullets chipping stone around him. The big man was wounded, but far from finished, and his anger was making him reckless. Come out and fight like a man, Crow roared, advancing on the boulder. Elias popped up and fired his bullet, catching Crow in the leg. The giant stumbled but didn't fall, returning fire with frightening accuracy. A bullet grazed Elias's temple, sending blood running down his face and stars exploding across his vision. The crowd was silent now, watching the deadly dance with horrified fascination. This wasn't the clean, quick death of a formal duel. This was brutal, personal, and savage. Crow reached the boulder and kicked it aside, revealing Elias's position. But the smaller man was already moving, rolling away, and coming up with his pistol aimed at center mass. Both men fired again, and this time Elias felt the impact, as Crow's bullet punched through his ribs. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but Elias forced himself to stay focused. His own shot had taken Crow in the chest, and the big man was finally beginning to slow down. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth, and his breathing was labored. You're tougher than I expected. Crow gasped, swaying on his feet. Tough enough, Elias replied, his hand pressed to his wounded side. They circled each other like wounded animals, each looking for the killing shot. Crow's pistol was empty, but he still had his knife, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed in the morning sun. Elias had one bullet left, and his vision was starting to blur from blood loss. I'm gonna gut you like a fish, Crow said, lunging forward with surprising speed for such a large man. Elias sidestepped and fired his last bullet, the shot taking Crow's center mass. The giant crashed to the ground, his knife spinning away across the snow. For a moment, he tried to push himself up, muscles straining with the effort. Then he collapsed face first and was still. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias swayed on his feet, his vision graying at the edges. He'd won, but at what cost? The bullet in his ribs felt like liquid fire, and he could feel his strength ebbing away with each heartbeat. It's over, he called out to Thornton, his voice barely above a whisper. Honor the agreement. Captain Thornton looked at Bremer, who was pale with shock and terror. The challenge has been met. Stand down your men. Like hell. Bremer snarled, his composure finally cracking. I'm not giving up everything because of some barbaric ritual. Men kill them all, but Bremer's mercenaries were already backing away, their weapons lowered. They'd signed on to terrorize Cherokee civilians, not to fight a war against seasoned warriors with blood in their eyes. With Crow dead and their position hopeless, they had no stomach for further bloodshed. Your men seem to disagree, Tsula observed. Perhaps they're smarter than you are. This isn't over. Bremer said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. I have friends in Washington. I'll be back with more men, more soldiers, more... No, Thornton said quietly. You won't. What? I said you won't be back. The challenge was legitimate, and you lost. I'm withdrawing Army support for your operations in Cherokee territory. You can't do that. I have a contract with the territorial government. You had a contract. Consider it voided as of this moment. Thornton turned to his men. Sergeant, prepare the men to move out. We're returning to the fort. As the soldiers began to organize their withdrawal, Elias felt his legs give out. He collapsed to his knees, his hands still pressed to his wounded side. The world was spinning, and he could taste blood in his mouth. This was it, the price of redemption, paid in full. Waya ran to him, her small hands trying to support his weight. Don't you dare die on me, she said fiercely. Not now, not after everything we've been through. I'm trying, he gasped. But I think this is it, little wolf. I think this is how it ends. No. Tears were streaming down her face. You saved me. You gave me back my mother. You can't die now. Tsula knelt beside them, her experienced hands examining his wounds. The bullet's still in there, pressing against something vital. We need to get it out, or he'll die for sure. Then do it, Waya said. Do whatever you have to do. It'll hurt more than anything he's ever felt. I've been hurt before, Elias said weakly. Do it. But as Tsula prepared her instruments, a commotion at the edge of the circle drew their attention. Bremer had pulled a hidden derringer from his coat and was pointing it at Waya's head, his face twisted with desperate rage. If I can't have the valley, he snarled, then nobody can, starting with this little bitch. Time seemed to slow as Elias saw what was about to happen. The girl who'd saved his soul was about to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His gun was empty, his strength was failing, and Bremer was too far away to reach. Except there was one thing he could do. With the last of his strength, Elias threw himself between Bremer and Waya, his body shielding hers from the gunman's aim. The derringer's bullet meant for her took him in the chest instead. The impact sent him crashing to the ground, his blood spreading across the snow like spilled wine. No. Waya screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Tsula's rifle spoke once, and Bremer crumpled to the ground, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. But it was too late. The damage was done. And why Waya was crying, her small hands covered in his blood. Why did you do that? Because... Elias struggled to speak, his voice growing weaker with each word. Because you're worth saving. Because you're the future and I'm just the past trying to make amends. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. No, I'm not. And that's okay. I've done what I came to do. Around them, the battle was ending. The surviving mercenaries had surrendered, throwing down their weapons in defeat. The Cherokee had won, but the cost had been high. I need to tell you something, Elias whispered to Waya. About your mother, about what really happened 3 years ago in that schoolhouse. I know, she said softly. I figured it out weeks ago. You were there, weren't you? You were the soldier with the scarred shoulder. I was. I could have saved her, but I didn't. I was a coward. No, Tsula said, her voice gentle. You were a man lost in darkness who found his way to the light. You saved my daughter's life, and that's what matters. I killed so many people. Elias said, his voice growing fainter. Burned so many villages. How can that be forgiven? Because you chose to change. Waya said, tears streaming down her face. Because when it mattered most, you chose to protect instead of destroy. The Cherokee have a saying, Tsula added. A man is not judged by his worst moment, but by his willingness to seek redemption. You sought it, and you found it. Elias felt his strength ebbing away, like water from a cracked dam. The pain was fading now, replaced by a strange kind of peace. He looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear through the clearing clouds. Take care of her, he whispered to Tsula. She's going to change the world. I will, I promise. And Waya, remember what I told you about mercy? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose forgiveness over revenge. I'll remember. Good, that's good. His eyes closed, and the last thing he heard was Waya's voice, strong and clear despite her tears. Thank you for everything. The funeral was held 3 days later in the sacred grove, where their ancestors rested. The Cherokee had their own burial customs, but Tsula had insisted on honoring both traditions, laying Elias to rest, according to Cherokee ways, while also respecting the beliefs he'd grown up with. Captain Thornton had remained for the service, along with a small honor guard of soldiers. It was an unusual sight, blue uniforms standing alongside Cherokee warriors united in grief for a man who'd bridged 2 worlds through his final sacrifice. He died as he lived at the end. Chief Sequoia said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. In service to others, protecting those who needed protection, I've been in contact with Washington. Thornton told Tsula after the service. There's going to be a full investigation into the territorial government's corruption. Several officials are facing charges, and there's talk of major reforms. Will it make a difference? Tsula asked. Maybe. Change comes slowly, but it comes. Your daughter's story has reached important ears. The image of a 12-year-old girl hanging from a tree has shocked people who thought they were beyond the shocking. Waya looked up at the mention of her name. What happens to the men who survived Bremer's mercenaries? They'll face trial for their crimes. Murder, kidnapping, conspiracy against the Cherokee people. Some of them will hang. And the valley stays Cherokee. The territorial legislature is passing a law making it a federal crime to interfere with Cherokee sovereignty. They're calling it the Cherokee Protection Act. Over the following weeks, as winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains, the changes began to take shape. Federal investigators arrived to document the crimes that had been committed. Journalists came to interview survivors and tell their stories to the nation. The tale of the Cherokee girl and the gunfighter who saved her became a symbol of both the worst and best of human nature. Waya found herself at the center of it all, a reluctant witness to history. Reporters wanted to know about her ordeal, about the men who tortured her, about the violence she'd witnessed and participated in. She answered their questions honestly, but without enthusiasm, more interested in helping her people heal than in reliving the past. As spring arrived early that year, Waya made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced her intention to leave the valley to attend school in the east, where she could get the education she needed to become a lawyer. You're too young, Chief Sequoia protested. You're only 13. I'm old enough to kill men in defense of my people, she replied. I'm old enough to learn how to protect them with words instead of bullets. Her mother supported the decision, understanding that her daughter needed to find her own path. She's not meant for a quiet life, Tsula said. She's meant to change the world. The night before she left, Waya visited Elias's grave one last time. The headstone was simple, carved with Cherokee symbols, alongside English words, Elias Boone. He chose redemption. I'm going to make you proud, she whispered to the stone. I'm going to use what you taught me to make sure no other child has to fight the way we did. A wind stirred the leaves of the maple tree above the grave, the same tree where she'd once hung like a broken doll. Now it stood as a symbol of survival, of the strength that came from enduring the unendurable. As she walked away, Waya felt the weight of her past and the promise of her future. She was no longer the frightened child who'd been strung up like game. She was a young woman with a purpose shaped by tragedy, but not defined by it. 20 years later, Waya Sequoia stood before the United States Supreme Court, her lawyer's robes a stark contrast to the buckskin dress she'd worn as a child. The case she was arguing would establish legal precedent for tribal sovereignty across the nation. In the gallery, an elderly woman watched with pride. Tsula had lived to see her daughter become one of the most respected attorneys in the country, known for her passionate advocacy and her ability to bridge different worlds. The Supreme Court's decision when it came was unanimous. The Cherokee Protection Act was upheld and expanded, establishing broad protections for indigenous peoples everywhere. It was hailed as a landmark victory, but Waya knew the real victory had been won years ago in a snowy valley by a broken man who'd chosen to save a child instead of destroying her. That evening, she returned to Frost Creek Valley for the first time in years. The maple tree had grown tall and strong, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms raised in celebration. Children played in its shade, their laughter echoing through the valley, Cherokee children growing up free and unafraid. She placed a wooden eagle at the base of the tree, a reminder of the man who'd carved it with his own hands. The tree stood guard over the valley, its roots deep in sacred soil, a living monument to the truth that redemption was possible for anyone willing to pay the price. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the maple leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled not in anger or fear, but in acknowledgement of a pack that had survived and thrived. The girl who'd once hung upside down from this very tree had become a woman who'd helped reshape the relationship between two peoples. Her work was done, her debt paid, her story complete. And in the growing darkness, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the land, a promise that the future would always be brighter than the past, as long as there were people willing to fight for it.